assumption in there is that your authentic self is something that doesn't change, right? What if it does? And what if it does grow and evolve as you want to evolve, right? If you have taken on the job as a leader, it is not for you to stay the same. And that's also something we should talk about. Is like, that is the moment leaders get totally stuck. That's the moment VCs should be most scared, when the leader has stopped evolving and changing, because this is a growing, living organism, you know? So I think it's okay to say, hey, you know, I usually ask a leader, even in my first session, how many questions do you ask in a given day? And they will quickly say, probably less than 5, right? And be like, how is that going for you, right? Like, the point is that they need to want to change. They need to want to do things differently. And maybe they're not that impressed with the fact that they always take up space and are always talking, right? And so try something on that feels right and stop talking too much if you want your people to do that. But again, I think this really comes back to, and it's a great question, who is your authentic self? And is it not an evolving thing?
Welcome to another episode of Everyday Leadership. Today, we dive into the transformative power of change and leadership. As the saying goes, when a leader moves an inch, the company moves a mile. But is it okay for a leader to change? Is it a sign of weakness or a strategic move for growth? To unravel these questions, we have the privilege of hosting Kate, an experienced executive coach who has guided numerous leaders through the process of change. In this episode, we explore the importance of leaders evolving, the potential impact on their teams, and real-life examples where embracing change led to positive outcomes. So without further ado, let's welcome Kate. Could you please introduce yourself, share a bit about your background, and provide some context on who you are and what you do?
Totally. Thank you for having me, Pradeep. It's wonderful to be here talking about my favorite topic. My early stages, I became quite obsessed with psychology and personal development at a very young age. And eventually that moved very much into leadership development in college. And I basically kept marrying the two, between personal development and leadership development in business. And so I continued on to study that in my master's degrees. And I have just always loved how people are at their best and how leaders are at their best within a company. And so, today I'm an executive coach. I do leadership development. I also do organizational consulting. And what has kept me going all of these years is really that moment that we're going to talk about, is when you see the light come back into a leader's eyes and they're excited again, and they're excited to do work differently.
Nice. And tell me one thing.
Yeah.
If a leader changes, will that make him look vulnerable to the people that are following him?
Great question, Pradeep. I understand it's a common fear, especially. And the reason I even came up with the quote of, when a leader moves an inch, a company moves a mile, is because, I was part of a huge culture transformation at a Fortune 100 company, and there was only a few of us in the company doing that work as consultants. And I started at the bottom grassroots level, and I met with huge groups of people, trying to do the work. But it wasn't until one day I said, you know what, we're just not moving the way I want to be moving, that I marched myself into the C-suite and started coaching all of the leaders of that company, that I felt the traction. I could understand and see like the growth and development with them. And what I helped them understand is that when they themselves were developing and growing, everybody noticed. Like, there were no more excuses. I'm sure you and anybody listening to this has had many conversations with employees in a company that says it's the leader's fault. So easy to blame the leaders, right? But when the leader is actively showing their vulnerability, saying, hey, Pradeep, I'm working on my communication. I'm working on being more transparent. Like, I'm letting you know. Everyone then has to look at their own stuff. Right. So it actually asks everybody to be more accountable to themselves. And to me, that is the essence of leadership.
Awesome. And let me even ask a more fundamental question, right? So even in our social interactions, when we communicate with other people, it could be a team or it could be another person, people are often very calculative about how they will come across to the other person. So they tend to not look very vulnerable, but they try to really come across as more confident, where they try to hide a lot of their inner weaknesses and whatnot. So, are you
Mhm.
saying that that's not the right way of doing it?
I don't know if I ever categorize anything as right or wrong because leadership is personal. Who you are,
Hmm.
Pradeep, will be different from somebody else's leadership style. But what
Hmm.
I want for people is to know who they are, what their values are. And talking about something like a client going sideways might be more vulnerable for me than you losing $100 million, right?
Hmm.
Like everybody has their thing that they're most vulnerable about. And
Hmm.
I think what's important is that people want to know and trust that A, you're also a human being. So if you're always confident, if you're always saying everything's shiny, like everybody can smell the BS, right? You can see it.
Hmm.
And I just remember the day a leader walked into the company and I was like an intern at this point, and she just said, "This is what happened. This was really bad. We are fully responsible. And this is how we're moving forward." There was no pretending. There was no backing out. And so to me, like, right, there is the line of like what's vulnerable and appropriate to share, right? And it needs to be okay that you're scared as a leader, because of course you are, and your people need to be able to handle it. And it's
Hmm.
okay that they
Hmm.
might be scared too, right?
Yeah, that's and also sort of help us understand. So, do you have any stories from your previous coaching experience of coaching leaders where, hey, I went and did something where I changed myself and that had a dramatic effect, or a negative effect, either ways?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you have any stories to share with us?
Yeah. One of my favorite stories and clients was at this really large company. I was working with the COO, and she had been there for, I believe, over 15 years. And she was so sharp and so smart and so capable. But I could tell that she was really miserable.
Hmm.
And when I started working one-on-one with her, I just asked, like, what do you want your employees to feel like in your company, right? Like, let's talk about culture in the broadest way and the most specific way. And slowly, as she kind of dropped into what an employee experience would be like, she got more connected to who she was as a leader, right? And who she thought she should be. That was the biggest problem for Deep, of like who
Hmm.
leaders think they need to be usually suffocates them the most,
Hmm.
right? So starting to work with her, I saw like the biggest transformation. People who had worked with her for 20, 25 years had come up to me and been like, "I don't know what you did, but
Hmm.
it's unbelievable," right? And to be clear, she did the work. I
Hmm.
was there to help and guide, and she was willing,
Hmm.
but she became joyful. She became inspired. She became reconnected to what was important to her, and she just needed to be given some guidance and in some ways permission, right? This is a leader of a very huge, successful company.
Hmm.
And still, I want to tell everybody who's not in that position, like you will still feel like that at times, you
I
know?
see. Hmm.
And that was like literally almost a 180 of a human being. And she went on to do some of the best work of her career. And that was, past the age of 50, which is a beautiful thing.
Nice. And one quick follow up question there. So, when someone's a leader become should start exhibiting who they are, or should they
Mm-hmm.
try and become who they want to be, or should they become that person which can get them the best results that they want? Like, there is a slight difference in terms of who they are right now and what they want to become, and they can
Mm-hmm.
land up in different places.
Yeah.
How should one really figure out how to, what would be the destination in
Yeah.
this transformation?
Yeah. I love that. Lots of shoulds in there, Pradeep. I pay careful attention to language. But what, at least how I look at transformation is I very much pay attention to like how humans evolve in behavior. We're talking about real adult behavior change, right? I'm sure you yourself have like tried many things and it's difficult, right? So I don't say, hey, go for this like best version of yourself. I think that's part of it, of having the idea, but it's really like really noticing and observing what right now needs to happen, right? Hey, I'm noticing my leadership meetings, people aren't speaking up. They're not taking risks, right? Lots of data right there. What am I observing? What am I noticing? And
Hmm.
so it's starting to tweak and alter because change does not happen overnight. It's small and specific. But I just always recommend, without judgment, saying, like, what am I noticing? And what can I personally do differently? So I think it overwhelms anybody to put themselves really far away from these goals. Some people, it really inspires them, but they always have to come back to what's the next smallest step.
Hmm.
Does that
Now
answer your
that
question?
so I have a bit of a follow up there as well. So
Yeah.
if I'm a leader and if I see people are not responding in the meetings,
Mm-hmm.
now the change that I want to make in myself, was it to bring change in the people so that they start contributing to the meeting? Or
Mm-hmm.
should I just, then am I losing my authentic self? Maybe that's who I am. But now I want a certain outcome. And in order for that outcome to come, I have to change in a certain way. Is
Mm-hmm.
that okay? Is that okay to, you know, there
Mm-hmm.
are some preferred outcomes. In order for me to achieve those outcomes, I need to change myself in a certain way. Is
Mm-hmm.
that kind of a change acceptable, or should we just stay true to who we are?
Well, the assumption in there is that your authentic self is something that doesn't change,
Hmm.
right? What if it does? And what if it does grow and evolve as you want to evolve, right? If you have taken on the job as a leader, it is not for you to stay the same. And that's also something we should talk about, is like, that is the moment leaders get totally stuck. That's the moment VCs should be most scared, when the leader has stopped evolving and changing, because this is a
Hmm.
growing, living organism.
Hmm.
So I think it's okay to say, hey, I usually ask a leader, even in my first session, how many questions do you ask in a given
Hmm.
day? And they will quickly say, probably less than 5, right?
Yeah.
And be like, how is that going for you, right? Like, the point is that they need to want to change. They need to want to do things differently. And maybe they're not that impressed with the fact that they always take up space and are always talking, right?
Hmm.
And so try something on that feels right and stop talking as much if you want your people to do that. But again, I think this really comes back to, and it's a great question, who is your authentic self? And is it not an evolving thing?
Yeah, that's a very good answer there. So people can change. I think you can change, and that sort of is also very important. Everything should change with time, and what you know today is not something what you know tomorrow,
Yeah.
and it's okay to change. So, and it's okay to exhibit that you're changing. And
Yeah.
with that, is there any process that you recommend to the leaders that you coach regularly? Like, how should they approach changing? Like, is there a sort of a trajectory that they should follow to start
Mm-hmm.
exhibiting their changes? Like, what is the process that they can
Mm-hmm.
apply to change themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I love that because it kind of goes back to your earlier question, right? And there is no exact blueprint. I treat every individual leader as an independent person, right? Because you have a million different needs and abilities, and I'm always tracking where you're at. So, one of my favorite questions I'll say on like an intake conversation, people will ask only once, they'll say, how are you going to measure it? And I'm like, oh, that's really sweet of you to ask. It's actually how you are going to measure it, right? I don't take the accountability away from them, because what I really want, Pradeep, is for people to be accountable to themselves. That is number one. That is it. That is the whole ball game. Hard to do, easy to say, right? And so for anybody listening, what you can start doing, right? And the reason I love this quote, and we were talking about the book earlier about nothing changes until you do, right? Is if you are looking around and you're unhappy with your environment, your circumstances, the best questions you can ask is, how am I part of the issue? How have I unintentionally created the environment that I'm not thrilled about? Because that's the moment of true empowerment. We we don't want to blame other people. It happens. Our brain does it. That's okay. And it's a great moment to say, what can I do differently? Because then you can really do something. And to feel that is critical. And I think when I see that light really go on in people's eyes, that's when they get it. So I would be asking myself, and I ask myself all of the time, how am I part of this? And what do I want to do differently?
Awesome. Let's talk about a situation which I personally saw myself. Is,
Yeah.
let's say you there was a reorg in a company and you ended up becoming a leader to this big org with maybe 100 people, and then one thing you noticed was that people were a bit unhappy about the reorg because they were not happy with losing their current leader, And that you as a new leader, when you stepped into this role, you saw that people are not responding to him or whoever it is. There's no response. Like, the way it would manifest is the leader would ask something and no one would just pay attention to it. And leader would, so the response is not positive. Now, how a leader should address, so, what kind of changes can the leader incorporate so he can really, put things in the right path?
Yeah, wonderful question. If that is going on, the first thing I would recommend is to start doing one-on-ones with everybody within their organization, right? And I would be asking much deeper questions about being like, hey, what about this doesn't feel right? What is upsetting you? And what's below that, right? Like, I would take time to get to know people, because you can off the top make your assumptions, but you're probably going to make things a lot worse. People are probably totally scared. You probably don't have the trust. You don't have the track record, right? They don't know who you are. And so they probably feel like they aren't protected themselves. Everything, what I love about psychology and the world of organizational psychology, is it really comes down to these core human emotions, right? Am I scared? Do I feel uncertain? What's the level of trust? Understanding? Do I feel appreciated? Right? If my leader's just been removed and I thought the world of this person, what do they think of me? And how do we come together as a team? It's a big reformation. It's not small. Reorgs take a lot of time and energy, but the first thing is one-on-ones with in-depth questions about who are you? What do you want this team to be about? Right? And like, how do we all show up together? It's not just about the leader. The leader is part of a team, right? But it's really, how do they get the best out of people and to have them contribute?
Awesome. Yeah, that completely makes sense. I think it's understanding what's stopping them from engaging with this leader. I think that's how you root cause it. Love the answer there.
And it'll usually surprise people, the answers.
Yeah. And are there, from your experience coaching all these leaders, do you have any do's and don'ts that you would generally recommend to them, as a general practice?
Yeah. I mean, that's a $1 million question. Deep do's and don'ts in general. Here's one of my favorite questions is when I'm doing values work, right? When I start working with the leader, I'm like, let's talk about your values. And sometimes people will say, do you mean me as a person or as a leader? And I'm like, why do you think they are different? Right? And I understand, because that's how we used to think about work, right? You had a personal self and you had a work self, but like, that time is gone. People want to know that when they see their leader, like, that's who they are when they're at home. That's who they are out in the world, right? These are your core values. And you need to know what those are as a leader, right? Because you need to know what your values are on a leadership team as well. And then how these tie up and roll up to the company values. But you knowing yourself will always benefit everybody the most. I think that's what surprises people, right? People maybe in the rest of the company, they're like, oh, leaders are so selfish. And I'm like, actually, no, they spend so much time thinking about everybody else that they actually can be a bad leader when they do that. Because if they don't know think about how many hard decisions a leader has to make every single day, at least between 5 to 7, right? And if they can't go home and look in the mirror and say, I'm proud of myself, that's where it starts to go sideways. And you have to listen to a board. You have an entire leadership team. You might have 500 to 50,000 employees below you, right? So like, that is core. And so I'm always like careful of like how much you listen to other people is hypercritical, but there are some things, and I'm specifically talking about a CEO, I should specify here. I work with all leaders, but a lot of CEOs, that is critical. And a hard decision doesn't feel good. It's not supposed to, but like, you absolutely know what's right because it is for the long term of this company. So I think that is one of the biggest. And then continuing to develop yourself. I think most people don't find a lot of personal time, right? I'd say leadership is isolating and lonely, unfortunately. Nobody tells you that when you're taking the job. They're like, Pradeep, would you like to make a lot more money, but be like pretty isolated in everything you have to do? And so finding a way to have that personal space, because you can't be connected to yourself if you don't, right? And to continue to develop and learn, because like, as the company grows, this is what you're sharing with people. I am growing and developing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. And one thing I noticed is that leaders, although they get blamed for every possible thing out there, but they don't get credit as much. And every
Mm,
time a team accomplishes something,
hmm.
leaders are busy celebrating all the folks that contributed to it.
Yeah.
Although they get a lot of the limelight, but they barely get credit.
Hmm.
Uh, do you have? What do you think? Is that true, or what's your observation there?
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity.
I appreciate you bringing that up because I get to see what happens inside the leadership circles and in like the most, intimate of conversations, right? And I think what's hard is it's everything we don't see. It's celebrating everything we don't see, right? So we're like, okay, our earnings are up, but we had 5 layoffs. Like whatever happened, the employees are reacting to, but what they don't see is like how hard the leaders have been working and struggling to make like the best decision possible. And also, quite frankly, the hardest part about all of it is the legal aspect and also what's appropriate to share. So I've been in companies that I hear everything what the employers are like saying, and then I actually know what's happening at the leadership level. Nobody will know. Pradeep, I think it's one of the hardest parts. Nobody will know why the leaders made this decision because it is not okay to share. Right. So part of it is like trusting that your leaders are making the best decisions possible and that you don't have the full information. I remember Barack Obama, for instance, talking about this in his book. He said something along the lines of like, by the time the news actually gets to you, it's 3 weeks old to me. Right. And like the things that I need to know to make these decisions, you will never know about. And that is true of any large medium company. And so I think to stop and think, right, like the fact that today, Pradeep, we're sitting here taking this podcast in, it's a beautiful day in the winter, right? And there are a lot of things that didn't happen and we're still safe and it's still okay. And that means people in our government, for instance, did the right thing and we were able to stay protected, or like how many green lights did you hit? So anyway, I have like a long list of things to think about there, but it's all of the stuff you don't see that you can sit and be like, maybe I don't know, and I still appreciate it. So I think that's a really hard part about leadership is they think one thing and they'll never know exactly why a decision was made.
Absolutely, completely agreed there. I think, uh, being a leader is very hard, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to make a lot of these decisions that have such big impact, and then for all the reasons, and if things go wrong, and the leader
Yeah,
will be blamed for everything. But anyways, but that's also a challenging job.
yeah.
That's one aspect of it.
And it's
But yeah, so
why I love
really,
that,
yeah,
just
go ahead.
showing up to have, like, I should just say, like, what I love is to be able to provide that space for a leader. Like when I work with a leader, I'm like, you get to just be a human here, right? Being a leader is part of it, but I want them to be able to be like, I'm a mess, right? I see all of the other parts that they don't necessarily share with other people. And it's critical to have that. Wherever you find it, you need to find a place that you can just be a full human. And I think I just respect that and hold it in high regard.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for sharing all those valuable insights. And we are at the end of this podcast, and I have an
Yeah.
interesting segment where I'll ask you a series of questions and would love your answers.
Yes.
And with that, what's the favorite business book that you've read recently?
I think you froze for that part. What was the
No,
question
I
again?
said, what's the favorite business book that you read recently?
Favorite business book. I read that, Pradeep, and I'm actually going to go somewhere else because I think it is applicable to business. And it's the book that I would say had changed my life the most. And it's called What Happy People Know by Dan Baker. And it's the
Nice.
first time I understood and learned about appreciation and the power of it. And I quickly started to apply it and studying it within organizations. And it's been one of the most powerful tools I've ever seen used in a company.
And who's your favorite leader?
Currently, I don't listen to her music, Pradeep, but I would say Taylor Swift is my current favorite leader. I have never seen such a positive movement, and I believe people don't see the business acumen that she has. And she is somebody who has stayed very true to herself throughout her entire career, and I believe it's because she knows her values, and she's stayed very clear on that she is where she is today and has had very little drama outside of it, right? She's one of the few people who's been a young star and now she's literally on top of the world. So from a business standpoint, I'm blown away.
Wow, that's interesting. Favorite life hack?
It's perfect for exactly what we're talking about today. I'd say when I wake up, I'm like, I just wish, our house was a little bit bigger, and I wish this and I want that, and all of the external wants and blaming is happening. I'm like, great. Like my flags go off in my head, and I say, what do you want to do differently, Kate? What can I change? Because I literally can't force these other things to change. And nor do I actually want to. So it's like, what's my perspective? What are my beliefs? What are my behaviors? And doing it lovingly, but it is the most empowering thing. And it's a great way to give yourself what you need.
Awesome. And finally, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think I would give myself the advice that I would give myself today, which is finding peace in the ebbs and the flows of life and business.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here on this podcast, Kate. Really appreciate that. Was an amazing conversation. Thank you for all the valuable insights. And thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Pradeep. I hope you have a great break.